You ever stepped into a space and just immediately felt good? Perhaps more energetic, perhaps more relaxed, perhaps a wave of calmness or even happiness. Now, what if that wasn't because of the negative ions in the air? It wasn't because of the low levels of electrosmog. And no, they weren't even diffusing some essential oils or doing anything observable, but it could still be quantifiably and qualitatively measured. Today, we're diving into a fascinating blend of ancient wisdom and cutting edge science that brings measurable changes to not only humans, but also animals and entire ecosystems. This is an entire field of study called biogeometry, bio for life and geometry for shape. Now, if you're at all like me, you're probably wondering, how do I know this isn't placebo? Because there are a lot of charlatans in the space and people that make exaggerated claims about quantum this or upgraded that. What I like about biogeometry specifically is that they've performed a whole bunch of research and have even been commissioned by governments to help optimize environments. And when you optimize your environment, your body starts moving towards balance automatically without requiring any conscious effort or discipline and willpower to do so. I've gotten several requests from you guys to create a video on how all this works, so I'll be doing that. But for the time being, I've also summarized some of the science behind biogeometry in an article I will put in the show notes for this episode, which you can find at mindbodypeak.com/182. Our guest today is none other than Doreya Karim, the director of Biogeometry Energy Systems, and she's been a key part of the biogeometry research and development team for over a decade, focusing on how to reduce environmental stress on biological systems, which include humans. Doreya has taught biogeometry in over 8 countries, delivering more than 50 trainings. In 2018, she was recognized as a She's Mercedes honoree, celebrating empowering women in Egypt. Now, this is one of those products I've been using for about 4 years now. I currently wear their ring, I have their L90 pendant on my necklace, and I have a home kit cube over in the back over here that you can't see. It's just out of the camera. And I take it with me traveling because, unlike supplements, which cause biochemical changes, this works at a level below the biochemical. So it also doesn't come with any side effects. The main benefit I notice is a level of calmness, and I seem to just recover better, even in the presence of cell towers. I used to have a massive cell tower in my backyard, and this technology was instrumental in helping me mitigate any consequences. I've been recommending their products for a long time now, and I'm excited to now partner with them. So if you use the code URBAN, that'll save you 8% on any order. But as a warning, they are usually out of stock. These things are hard to get. So if you happen to see it in stock, you're in luck, but don't expect that to last. This is an area where I also have a lot more research to do of my own because biogeometry is essentially a whole nother language. So if you too want to dive deeper, I suggest you check out the article I already mentioned and also pick up one or more of their books, which will help you more easily digest some of this. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, Doreya Karim. Doreya, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So I came across biogeometry, I want to say 4 years ago, and I have a couple of your different products in front of me right here. And today I'm excited to dive into the world of sacred geometry and biogeometry and really how just shape impacts biology, not just humans, but animals and plants and the whole gamut of life. So, since we don't have time today to do the usual warm up questions, can you start off by sharing what this is and how you got involved in it?
Okay, so biogeometry, like the introduction you gave, it's a science where we study the energy of shape and shape's effects on biological functions. So if we break down bio with looking at life, geo Earth, and metry, we can look at that as the measurement of the life force of the Earth, and within that we can add all biological beings, like you just said, and our energy interactions with the life force of the earth, as well as the life force in our bodies. And to understand exactly what I'm talking about in the birth of biogeometry, the first question that kind of comes about is what when we say life force, what do we mean or what are we talking about? Or and we have a very specific um, definition for what we're looking for whenever we're creating a space or a shape or a design. And that has to do with the energy of sacred power spots. So the birth of biogeometry is really based on this energy quality, where if you've studied different types of vibrational or energy practices, a lot of times what you do is you have a way of studying and classifying the energy of the body, right? So even if it's as simple as a polarity based yin yang, or we can even just say overbalanced or underbalanced or anything in that manner. There's different types of systems for being able to study and classify energy. So we work with a system that was, I would say, handed over to my father. So looking at how I got involved, handed over to my father as a scientific radiesthesic method that's referred to as French or physical radiesthesia, that classifies energy qualities based on color qualities. So we can look at different types, different locations, different shapes, and measure different color qualities related to them.
What would an example of that be?
So an example of that would actually be colors. So if we take colors, if we take 7 colors, for example, and we take our radiesthesic instruments, each one of those colors has a different length on our pendulum. So it's a way, that's why we say it's a vibrational science versus a lot of times if your audience has seen people with pendulums or radiesthesic instruments, they're mostly what's more popular would be people who are using it to have a dialogue with the subconscious, which is not um, at all how we're using biogeometry. It's really, like I said, based on if we go back thousands of years, back to even if we look at things like ancient Egypt, we understand that we can classify everything based on its resonant color quality. And we explain that, and it goes beyond. So once you get things like the wavelength of a color, you can find that you have notes that are in resonance with the color, for example. So you begin to see how everything is in vibration and everything's in information exchange across all of our sensory experiences. And then we have a scale for which we can talk about energy qualities. Now, I'm diving in quickly here, deep, because I think it's important for people when I come now to the next point of the basis of biogeometry, because when we talk about, like I said, there was French radiesthesia as part of the development of biogeometry in the sense that it's a science that classifies energy according to colors. You have it classified in many different ways in different systems, right? It's the what they share is that vibrational sciences deal with classifying everything in a kind of sympathetic resonance. So I can classify everything according to its resonant quality, depending on whatever scale I'm using. So with biogeometry, my father, who inherited a bulk of this radiesthesic work, and whose father had a lot of interest and knowledge into different esoteric aspects of ancient Egypt, as well as being um, uh, both my father and my grandfather architects. It drove them to a different way of looking at this criteria, which is rather than looking at it as an assessment system, which is assessing the body, finding, so which was part of the original French radiesthesic work. It was, I could assess, for example, if you have an issue in your liver, I could I could find, okay, what's the resonant color quality right now that we're picking up when we're measuring your liver.
And you would do this with the pendulum? You would hold the pendulum over my liver, and then you figure out what color it is based on, like, testing of some sort?
from a radiesthesic perspective, yes, you can go. There's different types of radiesthesic pendulums. One of them, for example, is it's just one pendulum, and it has a disc that you would every time you move up and down the disc, it's related to a different color quality. So I would see, for example, which one is in resonance with the liver, and then which you're having an issue with right now. And then I could see, for example, so without we understand that that liver, because it's showing an imbalance, is either over functioning or under functioning. And we would find the color that would bring it back into balance. Of course, this is very basic, but it was part of spreading French radiesthesia because a lot of it, for example, so there's famous Jesuit monk, Abbe Marmet, famous radiesthesist, who was known for his healing practices. So he would go to different areas and offer healing practices, um, among other many, many hosts of things that he was able to offer.
Would this type of thing address the root cause? Like, how would it be different from me just going in and getting some routine blood work done and looking at, say, liver enzymes to understand how my liver is performing?
Okay, so there's different aspects here. Um, this is right now just a very small portion of how we would look at that. But the difference by understanding root cause is a lot of times when we talk about a vibrational approach to the body, a subtle energy approach to the body, versus one where you're going to get blood work and trying to address an issue, is that one doesn't see the body as a whole. So one doesn't see the body as um, a complete energy exchange system within the body itself and within the environment. And that's actually where biogeometry comes in. So with the introduction I was giving is basically where biogeometry, where we got to, or where my father got to, is he started to look at if we're talking what if we're talking about the ideal energy quality that can help hold the body in balance. We're looking at the energy of sacred power spots. So he looked at that from an architect's perspective. And he looked at that where there were already some clues, where there was in history, they would say that there were certain energy qualities associated with very spiritual people or with areas where they were buried as well. But he started to look at sacred power spots as being areas, and going back to plants and animals, these were areas where it goes beyond belief and where plants and animals were also thriving. So it would be areas that animals were attracted to for healing that became the basis of ritual. And then, most importantly, they were areas on the subtle energy level where you could visit, and whether that liver that we've been talking about is over functioning or under functioning, you could visit and spend time there, and it would bring the body back into balance. So this is why we refer to it as a centering energy quality. So now it comes to, okay, so how do we bring this about, or how do we measure? Or we talked about now that we use a color quality system. Well, that's what he actually found. In sacred power spots, you can find a specific combination of color qualities that we refer to as BG3, the energy of sacred power spots. And it opens the gateway to be able to access what we would call multidimensionally, a multidimensional healing, moving from that physical energy exchange level through the vital, emotional, mental, spiritual, because that's the energy of a sacred power spot. It's that centering quality, because when we understand it, we understand that there is no center on the physical level. If you draw a circle and you look for the center, there will always be a center of the center. One of the main things, now going back to the root cause, what biogeometry brings to the table, because we get thousands of practitioners in our classes. And what biogeometry brings to the table as a solution is is a solution for the energy exchange with the environment. So for many people, the root cause is environmental in nature. And we've seen that through various studies. And probably the one we're most known for is in regards to Hamburg, Switzerland. And in Hamburg, Switzerland, there was the installation of a cell tower, and people started having major problems. And I'm talking about health problems across the board, including things related, not just physical problems, but emotional ones as well. Things like agitation, anxiety, more fighting. Of course, those are also related to physical problems because many of them had lack of sleep, breathing issues, different things like that. Now, biogeometry came in as an environmental solution. We installed specific shapes on the cell tower, specific shapes in various places in the environment, a complete environmental solution. And we saw that symptoms disappeared within a week and the solution held 2 years later. So that's an independent study that anybody can find on our website. But it proved that factor of the environment being a root cause, the energy exchange of the environment being a root cause that is ignored. Because if anybody looks up that study and they look up, that pilot study with a few families, you see that there's a graph where the families, we look at how many individuals are symptom free in general, health symptom free, emotional symptom free, and we look before and after the biogeometry solution. And it's a clear graph where you see that before the biogeometry solution, almost everybody has severe symptoms, and it's like this. After the biogeometry solution, almost everybody, the majority, are symptom free of any type of issues, whether it's physical, emotional, mental. And so that's what biogeometry brings to the table when we talk about the root cause. The energy exchange with the environment is actually something that any energy practitioner out there knows that it's one of the missing keys that's extremely hard to address.
Yeah. And so when you guys were doing this installation, were you seeing changes to the livestock in the area and or the plant growth? Because it's one thing if I don't know if the humans there knew they were enjoying the benefits of biogeometry getting installed onto the tower around them.
So
The plants
so
obviously don't
actually,
know.
I mean, going back to my father, he did a TED talk called "Why Is the Cow Smiling?" And he explains at the beginning of the TED talk that had it not been for the cows, this would have all just been chalked up to a placebo effect. And I do have to also say that it was repeated as well in another town called Hirschberg. And in that talk, he explains because there was a press conference that was held, and somebody came out and said placebo effect. And one of the residents themselves stood up and said, sir, our cows do not speak Arabic. And it actually had to do with that, is with the installation of that cell tower. Um, there was a lot more stillbirths with the cattle. And then that was a problem, for example, that was solved. There was different ecological things that were issues, like like migrating birds. One of the big things that first happened was bats came back and they had left the area. So there's a lot of changes that happened that biogeometry was able to restore in the environment. Also, I'll say this whenever we talk about this, so many people ask, or if this was a viable solution, why aren't you repeating it everywhere? Um, and I'm just saying it because most of the time at this point, because we're talking about all these amazing results, and that's the question that comes to mind. Now, this was a specific time. Um, I would say before there was so much research coming out about EMF, or I would say vocal research about EMF, when at that time, also my father was actually he's a graduate of ETH in Zurich. So that's one of their top universities, and he knew people personally who allowed them to do this as two project installations. But it was that we actually did this in conjunction with Swisscom, so in conjunction with the telecom company, and that's why when a lot of people ask why isn't it repeated, well, we need the telecom company to give us access to the tower in order for us to be able to do that. The residents of these two towns have been great in the sense that whenever there's been an upgrade to the tower, they still let us in there. Like they won't let them change anything until we're there and putting up solutions. Um, and that's so instead now, so you held up one of the products, and that's actually so one of the products you have is our home kit. That and it comes with a bunch of little attachments. And so that home kit has a bunch of little notches in there, and they're not actually notches. The shapes in there have to actually do they're part of the shapes that were installed on the cell tower and in the environment, but made really small.
For those who can't see, I'm holding up a cube, a transparent cube that has a bunch of shapes inside of it.
And then you have different attachments to go on the water, on the electricity, and different aspects, like we say, different energy keys in the home, different things on the windows as well. Uh, and so I would say that basically, when we understand the centering quality, it opens up the door for not just a biogeometry approach, but I would say any subtle energy approach uh, to go beyond a polarity based solution. And to be able to, when I talked about kind of what we call the planes of nature, vital, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, um, the reason I'm referencing those is because when you have that centering quality that's at the basis of many healing rituals and traditions and locations, when you're able to reproduce it in any practice, then you know that you're communicating with the body on the level where you're producing these results multidimensionally through the environmental energy exchange. And it's why we get to see those results that we see.
I'd love to know more about the actual process of like designing the solution. First of all, like how do you come up with these shapes? Because I've looked at them and some of them look like objects that I'm familiar with, and then some of them look like just cool designs, but not shapes that I've seen.
I mean, I'll say there's a few aspects to many of the shapes that you would be seeing in different biogeometry shapes. So you're holding up one of our biosignatures ring that has to do with the body. I'll explain that as well. But in a lot of the products that we have, you'll find actually shapes that many people may be aware of. Things like a torus, for example, but adjusted to specific proportions. You will find domes and kind of hemispherical shapes as well, specifically adjusted in specific proportions. So we do have to. One of the things for people dealing with energy of shape is you have to be very careful dealing with domes or pyramid shapes if you don't have an understanding of being able to measure, because they're shapes that need a specific proportion, a specific correction, and they're energy emitters, and they will. So you always have to be aware of how you're using them and how they're being configured. But also, what you'll find in there is lots of different number qualities. So you'll see that we have multiple disks, either generating specific number qualities. And when I say number qualities, I know for a lot of people. So a lot of times when we talk about um, understanding things like color healing now is something that people understand. Even if we talk about different sound healing, color healing as different types of healing, people are like, okay, I get that. As soon as I talk about numbers or shapes, people for some reason it doesn't register as easily, even though if you understand them as sensory experiences, and we understand that colors being sensory experiences basically means that they have different energy effects on the body. Well, it's the same thing with numbers or shapes. You see different shapes. So there's different shapes um, that have different color qualities to them. There's different numbers that have different color qualities to them. So you will find these different configurations in all of the biogeometry shapes. So basically, when you learn biogeometry, you learn this vibrational language that is an interplay between color, all of your sensory experiences, color, sound, smell, touch, taste, and you begin to see as well. I mean, there's a lot of research on how one experience can affect the other. Like, there's a lot of research now, for example, on how different smells can affect tastes, different things like that. But you begin to learn it all as an abstract vibrational language. And you begin to see, when you learn it that way, and you begin to see our physical reality as a manifestation of these abstract qualities, it um, it lends to a lot of the understanding of different um, knowledge. If you have a bit of a background in hermetic knowledge, or different schools where we begin to understand this concept of as above, so below. So understanding this aspect, just learning to measure from a biogeometry perspective, puts it all in your hands very, I would say, concretely. I mean, uh, surprisingly, a lot of times the way, so biogeometry, the way that we teach, a lot of people uh, actually feel like it's a bit more left-brained. And what we do is when we teach, we feel like we have to do this because when we look at human beings, we understand that we had a shift from the right brain to the left brain. And now we're using the left brain to widen and open up that window to that right brain knowledge and understanding and way of looking at the world. But we're able to actually do it for those who sit down and listen. We're able to do it in a way that I would say almost everybody can agree upon.
So do you guys have an alphabet of different symbols and what they correspond to?
So the ring, I said we would explain that. So the ring that you have is actually, if we look at different energy pathways in the body, we can begin to trace different energy pathways. So an example of this would be the meridian system. Meridian system in traditional Chinese medicine, for example, is energy pathways that run along the whole body. Now, when we're looking at biosignatures, these are actually energy pathways that are within the organs themselves. And in each organ, we find multiple energy pathways that you can pick up, each having different color qualities, for example. And the way that it works is, again, I'm diluting this a little bit, but to just make it accessible, is once we have an energy pathway in the body, um, we look at how we can adjust it using design principles to keep it in resonance with the body through what we call resonance of shape, in resonance with the pathway in the body, while bringing in that centering quality, the quality that we find in sacred power spots. So that's what allows us to have that. And then when we do that and we bring it into the energy system, then what are we doing? We're in resonance with that energy pathway through resonance of shape. But the adjusted shape that we have has that centering energy quality to it. And that then we begin to have an information exchange on that level.
Okay. And if I'm wearing other jewelry, other things in my body that don't have these specific shapes on them, is that going to counteract or even out the biogeometry?
No, I wouldn't say that. I mean, okay, so there's different things um, where, for example, sometimes electrosensitive people can't wear metal on the body, um, but you'll notice that the biogeometry pendants or the ring are metal, and that's because these were designed to interact with electromagnetic fields. Whereas, so I would say maybe, I mean, that's one exception that some people who are electrosensitive do not like to have metal in the body, do not like to have metal chains. But having other shapes, no, I won't say like it's not an issue. You're not going to be causing, um, I would say, damage to the energy system. But if they're combined with the biogeometry pendant or well, not the ring, you don't have to worry about that. But if they're combined with the biogeometry pendant, they shouldn't be covering it. So in that case, what we recommend is to have it on a different chain. And that way you can have a different length so they're not covering it. So you're not basically stopping the pendant from working. Same thing for people who have the home kit installed. If you have other subtle energy solutions, what you will find is sometimes that home kit, we say it needs to be cleared. Um, so on a daily basis, we just need to clear it of impregnation that happens from energy exchange. Just like anybody familiar with crystals, those need to be cleared, for example. If you do have other solutions, we may find that you need to clear it more often.
I'd like to know more about how it all works. I'm getting like the idea of it's increasing like levels of BG3 or like that centering quality and the different shapes and correspond to different colors and the different colors can correspond to different organs in the body and everything. How does this like one shape in the environment have that like such a dramatic effect on an individual or I guess not even just an individual, like, an entire like ecosystem around it?
Looking at Hamburg, right? It's not that there was a shape just installed on its own that made a huge impact in the environment. It was a shape installed on the cell tower, and you already saw the cell tower itself was having a huge impact on the environment before we even installed the shape. So what we did is we used the shape to superimpose the energy quality of the shape on the existing carrier wave. So that carried it into the environment. And it's the same idea now when we look at the body, for example. So the pendant that you're wearing, how it works. I've just been talking about resonance of shape, and that's basically it. I want you to just, I'm gonna try to say this in a way because I know not everybody's gonna be able to see us. I was gonna show it, but just imagine that there's if I'm just drawing like a little pathway, a little random pathway right now, okay, or even say like I'm drawing a circle. So imagine there's that same circular pathway in the body. Whenever I bring those two shapes close to each other, there's a resonance of shape that occurs. And that creates an energy exchange with the body. And that's how the biosignatures work, because we have to have them on the body. Now there's different aspects of shapes in general. For example, if we look at, I mentioned pyramid and dome shapes and how these are energy emitters. So if we look at the pyramids of Giza, for example, one of the main secrets of the pyramids, so the pyramid shape we know is an energy emitter, regardless of where you put it. And anybody kind of interested in energy of shape, you can YouTube, shape experiments with pyramids. Like I said, you have to be careful with pyramid shapes because they do need a corrective solution. But the bigger thing is you need to be aware of what you're emitting. And so since the dawn of humanity, it's whether it's just a regular dolmen that um, that's placed over an area at high energy point, and that dolmen itself made of something like a quartz will allow that energy to resonate in the space. Well, same thing with, if we look at the pyramids, not just their material but the shape itself. So they're placed on a power spot, and by placing that energy emitter shape on a power spot, the power spot itself has emitting properties and the shape itself has emitting properties, so it increases that throughout the space. So it's the same thing where even when we're looking at your home, how is a little cube, for example, having an impact on the entire house? Well, then we have to look at, so just like, for example, how is the pendant having an impact on the whole body? Well, there's something on it that's resonating with a moving pathway in your system. Same thing with your home. What most people aren't aware of is the phenomenon of geopathic stress. And geopathic stress is sometimes what we refer to as grid lines, but they're different earth energy lines that we can measure. And I've just talked about power spots, and generally, so we differentiate those. So whenever we're looking at movements of energy in the earth, we can talk about ones that have a centering effect, and we could talk about ones that are imbalancing. And so generally when we talk about geopathic stress or grid lines, we're referring to something that's causing an imbalance. Well, what most people aren't aware of is geopathic stress lines occur about every 2 meters. So you
Oh,
have a lot in your home. And by having something like the cube, which has shapes that are designed to balance the geopathic stress lines, that's one example of carrying that energy in the whole home. Even things you might have noticed, I said at the beginning when we talked about the cube, I talked about you have these attachments. And I said the word energy keys. And energy keys to us are basically when we're looking at your home, again, what's the easiest way for us to have an effect on the entire home is to look at the movement of energy in the house. So we are balancing the electricity and the water because they're generally imbalanced, as well as the energy coming through the windows. But whenever we balance these things, they're actually things that are carried over in your whole home, right? So again, the water, electricity, and whenever we look at any movement of energy, so even if I talk about balancing the energy movement coming through a window or a door, that affects the whole space, and that's what we call um, our energy key, which is basically whenever we have a straight line of movement of energy, I want you to imagine that line of movement of energy creating a toroidal field around it. And you can measure that. And so those are all examples of how we can have that energy have a huge impact in the space. Even, for example, I talked about geopathic stress. You actually also, I mean, you have it on the ground as lines. Another thing that most people aren't aware of is that you can have planes. So a plane basically appears, and you could see that we have a slide in our foundation training where you see the leveling of the pyramids, and you can see that they're aligned to these different energy planes as well. And with the plane, basically, just like the electricity you place a solution carries over in the whole house, well, same thing. If I put a shape and I balance that plane, it creates a field in the whole home because that plane is running through the entire home. So that's an example of how we can get these small things to have a big effect.
Sure. And will you quickly summarize for people who aren't familiar what geopathic stress can do to human biology?
I'm not um a huge proponent of the word just, coming in because we say everything causes right now we like to just say everything causes cancer. So I'm not like I don't like to come in with that fear-based explanation, but again, looking at geopathic stress, the one of the most famous then this is why I'm bringing this up. One of the most famous research related to geopathic stress was by von Paul, and basically, what he did is he um, looked at a town in Germany where you had the highest incidences of cancer. He mapped out different areas of geopathic stress, and there was like an official from the county kind of going behind him, where he was mapping it out and then identifying the correlation between that and I would say like cancer clusters, um, and then repeated it after some negative feedback, repeated it in the area with the least incidences of cancer. But the reason, like I say, that one of the things that's very important for us in biogeometry is, and I think that kind of also has to do with now looking at the root cause of things when, or looking at how we resonate with our environment. There's a lot of solutions out there for geopathic stress. There's a lot of solutions. Um, I'd say a lot of people that might be speaking exactly the same way I'm speaking. There's this, but the difference that biogeometry brings to the table is most of the time that we tell people, we actually tell our students what we want you to do is focus on creating a centered space, um, and bringing that centering quality into your energy system. Only after we do that do we worry about things like geopathic stress or other factors in the environment. And the reason for that is if you come in and you say, you know what, the geopathic stress in my home, that's all balanced. Um, that doesn't mean much to me for several reasons. I still don't know if you have a good environment. Okay, so you've balanced the geopathic stress. I don't know if you have a good environment. I don't know if you have a sustainable solution as well, because when we're dealing with geopathic stress on its own, it has to be within the context of an environmental solution. And so, one of the main things that we actually do is we look at just bringing the centering quality higher and higher, how we resonate with it, how we can recreate it in our daily life. And then we even do it for things that are beneficial. So you can take, for example, so one of the practices that we say to do, you could take a glass of water and find that it's balancing on your energy system. It'll measure well, but it doesn't necessarily have that centering quality. So we see how we can add it to that. So it's not just looking for a problem and solving it, which is the usual go-to approach. But in the end, what we do is once you focus on raising that centering quality, it will create a cascade of solving different things in your body and the environment. And then we can kind of see what we missed and what needs to be addressed. And that's how we work with the environment. That's how we work with the body. And so a lot of times when people come to us for consultations, a lot of times people will want us to measure um, land for them that they're about to buy. And we don't do that for the simple reason that our resonance and energy exchange with the land always is first dealing with the centering quality. So we won't look for the negative aspects to start. We will actually look for the BG3 lines. We will start bringing design principles in, dealing with the land where we can increase that energy quality as much as we need, and then verifying that we've taken care of many things. Now, the reason I'm kind of bringing this up to your audience is because I think it's one of the most important things for somebody going into vibrational work or having an interest in this to hear is that I want you to imagine that there's two kind of sets of people. One, and this is what we've seen. Um, one whose energy system is really good at finding problems, and one whose energy system is really good at finding solutions. And both of these people are going to help many people. But at the end of the day, the one who's very good at finding solutions is going to be healthier as a person. And that's one of the main things that we try to focus on for anybody going into this work, trying to help themselves and help other people.
I see. So let me make sure I understand this. The focus is to first work on centering oneself, myself. And after do that, it might be a lead domino that makes all the other environmental corrections less necessary, or I guess some of the issues, potential issues there would be addressed because I've already balanced and centered my own energy.
And that's it's an important aspect because in energy work related to the home, it's not usually done in this manner. It's usually done in the opposite manner, but it doesn't lead to the same result. And people can see this with diet. Um, you can There's a lot to avoid, but just because you're avoiding a lot doesn't mean that you suddenly have this balanced microbiome, right? You have to look at what you can incorporate in your energy system and what happens when you incorporate that. When you incorporate a lot of things that are centering, when you get that good, healthy microbiome, then even that negative stuff has less of an impact on the body. And so you might not solve everything by incorporating all these beneficial foods, but you're going to solve more than taking out one or two things. Of course, this is a blanket statement, obviously, if you're allergic to something or have a specific, but just a way of understanding that from something very physical, but now looking at it from the subtle energy perspective.
Hmm. Well, I'm curious on that note specifically too. If you have an intolerance, let's not say a full blown allergy, but if you have that and you go from totally imbalanced over or under, I guess that would be overactive, then what would biogeometry do, if anything, to that person?
I mean, we worked on dairy farms, and we had the farmer that we were working with was lactose intolerant. So what he did is this: we looked at different areas where he had the cows, and he had a few. So basically, what they do is they have a leukocyte count, and if you have one or two sick cows, it can throw off your complete leukocyte count for the whole farm. And he had a few very sick ones, and then a lot that were very healthy. And so we explained to him that it actually, when we did measurements, it had to do with the location. We're not saying everything has to do with the location. Like I said, we did the measurements, it had to do with the location. So what he did is he said, okay, thank you. And then he took his healthy cows and put them in the location where we said that there was issues, and then he took his unhealthy cows and he moved them. Now the healthy ones started getting, the other ones may have been getting a bit better, but not enough where the healthy ones started getting also a leukocyte count that was higher than before. And so he called us and he was like, okay, so now we need a biogeometry solution. Please come help. Um, and we went in and applied different biogeometry solutions. We did get a solution for the leukocyte count that worked for him. But more than that is he started drinking the milk that is from that farm. He was able to drink it even though he was lactose intolerant. But even going to that, I mean, he ended up drinking like a whole jug of milk. And we even told him, we're like, listen, like, we're not lactose intolerant. If you're going to try this out, don't drink a whole jug of milk. Like, we would not feel good doing that as well. And then again, that's going back to, it's a solution. Whenever we're talking about subtle energy solutions, you can see amazing things. But one of the things I think that people forget when it comes to the energy of the body is the best, one of the not the best, but your easiest way to change your energy is actually through physical actions. So a lot of times, even if you have no notion of what I'm talking about or multidimensional energy exchanger, but you're putting everything into centered physical actions, that's going to show up whether or not you know. the rest of this work. Of course, it's beneficial to know because, like I said, of that environmental energy exchange and different things. But it's the same idea where if you can supersede it with an energy solution, it doesn't mean we should. It comes in and hopefully becomes part of that holistic solution for your body.
So by centered physical actions, I'm assuming, but it could be wrong, that you're talking about if you have an issue with EMF, the first thing you want to do is to remove the source of EMF, a distance between you and the EMF. Is that what you mean by centered physical actions?
Okay, if you're electrosensitive, definitely that's going to be your go-to. Now, the thing with EMF is it's negatively impacting you, um, whether or not you're electrosensitive. I mean, that's one thing to keep in mind. Um, but I think what I'm saying is that you take care of your mind and your body, and that can look like so many different things, right? So it can look like choosing to eat in a specific way, choosing to place your phone on airplane mode, doing whether it's acts of kindness, connecting to other people, um, all of these different practices that are part of. I mean, it's that are part of creating that centered energy exchange as much as possible. And then from a biogeometry perspective, so biogeometry does make things easier for the simple reason that shapes are generally an abstract vibrational language. And this can make things easier where, for example, um, when we measure different levels of emotional or mental energy, for example, and we can do that with the body. There's shapes that are corresponding to different aspects of the body, and it's easy also to see because when we talk about the energy level, a lot of different energy levels in the body. There's a lot of as well texts and documentation out there where you can begin to see that an imbalance in one organ, for example, will lead to different emotional issues in the body. So the thing that biogeometry gives you is a lot of times psychologically when we're trying to analyze something within our own thoughts, um, it can be a little bit of a wormhole depending on what we're dealing with. So coming in with an abstract shape can help. Coming in and applying an abstract shape to that solution can help. So again, so basically that's where I'm saying where it's kind of coupled in with everything. And it had to do with answering the question of, okay, so if someone has an intolerance, what could you do? And the answer is, okay, so even if we can't solve that intolerance, it doesn't mean that necessarily we need to be exposing the body constantly to that.
Yeah, of course. It's just a cool party trick to be able to let someone consume milk after they haven't had it in, say, 10, 20 years.
Exactly. It's a,
A couple other things I want to cover. One thing I was thinking about when you were speaking is that archaeologists often will dig and find that ancient civilizations tend to build on the same places, and there's a whole world out. A lot of it is habitable. So, is there any correlation there between like power spots around the world and
so that's kind of where in the beginning I had mentioned that their power spot, that these sacred power spots go beyond any any belief or tradition. And I gave the example of maybe plants and animals, but that's also one example where we see that different civilizations will choose the same locations um, as these spiritual locations, even though you're coming in with a completely different um, civilization. That the normal thing would be to actually kind of eradicate and build somewhere else. And so you can see examples of layers of these locations. One, the same location being chosen um, for different civilizations.
okay. And then also when it comes to building and geometry of buildings, I've read about claiming that they got sick when they went from their traditional houses, homes into the more box, square, rectangle style buildings we live in now. Have you seen anything around that? Or do you guys, when you consult with people, recommend they shape their structure accordingly?
Okay, so that is, I think, a question that we can stay on for a long time because I mean, okay, so the first person to actually bring biogeometry lectures to North America was Helmut Z, who was the founder of the Building Biology Institute. So with building biology, we look at a lot of different, and you look at a lot of different building practices. They have a whole host of building practices related to electromagnetic fields, but also natural building materials, um, and and the energy exchange. So dealing exactly with what you said about how the industrialization of the building industry um, led to basically homes where we're not looking at materials that can do a natural energy exchange and filtration, whether they're regulating temperature, but rather or air quality, but rather ones that are basically how they're evaluated is how well sealed they are, so that I can then um, heat, cool, deal with all of that air energy exchange, and how that can also create a whole host of uh, health issues. And then coupled with that, yes, when we do look at natural building shapes versus boxes and different angles of shapes and everything, I would say that what we did find when we were dealing with designing classrooms for autistic children is that 90-degree angles were not ideal in the classroom design. So, ideally, what you would have, though, when we're looking at it, is we would have, from a biogeometry perspective, so just the reason I brought up building biology is I said that one of the things that you lost when you moved away from natural building materials is you lost that energy exchange with the environment when we're dealing with things like natural temperature regulation, air quality. Well, from a biogeometry perspective, you also lost the energy exchange with the land itself. And it's really easy to bring that back. So there's one video um, on YouTube that my father just recorded and put up, and at the end of that video, there's a really clear example of how this is so easy to implement. He's originally a master planner, and he looks at one of the sites and he says, "We're so used to just coming in and look at a master plan, and you can imagine that a lot of times you'll find like a straight path that's the main kind of line that people are moving down, and then everything can kind of branch off, or a few main lines." So in Roman times, for example, we find these there. So there was lines called Cardo and Decamanos. These were based on the power spots, and where they interacted. The crossings as well was seen as the center of, if you think of an imaginary dome going over the city. But now what we do is when we don't see those energy pathways, and instead, what does that line do? It cuts across that energy line, that BG3 line, or for people who want to say ley line, that's available, which is um, it cuts through it, and now you're not only ignoring it, but you're damaging it. You're cutting through, and it's so easy to just move along with it and branch off from it. It might not be the exact straight line that you're looking for, but it's really easy to actually come in and then have that kind of feed that entire ecosystem you're building.
I have a feeling you're not going to like this question because it's going to draw an overly simplistic answer. But what are the things people notice in general when they use biogeometry or they take more note of what you're describing right now and do things according to the principles of BG3 and centering energy?
I don't want to be someone that says everything gets solved. Um, and I'm not saying that. The answer is related to things that are affected by the environmental energy exchange with the body. And that's going back to that root cause, going back 360 when we talk about that root cause. It is a cause of many of various issues in the body, not all issues, but various issues in the body. And the reason I'm saying that is because, like I said, we get so many energy practitioners that they come to class because that's where they're stuck. That's where they're stuck, where, for example, you can have a balancing session, and then they can measure your energy system after, but then tell the client to imagine themselves sleeping in their bed, and suddenly that everything you've done is back to nothing. And so the problem is that that could be a cause of so many different issues in the body. And so that's where I'm saying it depends on what the cause is. For if it's something that's affecting so many people but manifesting in different ways. Now, one of the things I will say is, for the home kit, we do in classes, we're able to measure the ideal location of placing that cube. But for people who don't come to class, um, my advice is always this: it's always take 3 weeks and pick 3 different locations to place your cube. Remember to clear it every day. Don't do it. Sometimes the first night you're not always going to sleep the best, but by the second and third, compare your sleep in those 3 different locations with the cube. Um, you will find a big impact.
Nice. Well, I'll have to try that. But Doreya, I have so many other questions for you. You have to run, so I'm going to let you go. If people want to check out some of the resources you've mentioned, the videos, the studies that you guys have done to find your products, how do they go about that?
So biogeometry.com. Let them from biogeometry.com. They can go to for the products biogeometryshop.com, but there's also a list of retailers on there as well. And I would say lots of resources um, in Dr. Karim's books. He has 3 books on. You could find them on Amazon if you just search biogeometry. And the recent one is quite heavy. I feel like I have it here. Quite heavy, quite dense. Might not be the easiest to understand. I do suggest that people start with the other 2 books because a lot of times people will want to start with the one that's just released. But the great thing is he's doing we're slowly recording a book review of the chapters. So whoever is reading the book can actually follow along, and we're pretty early on. We're pretty early on in recording that book review, so you can kind of catch up and join us for the whole. I'm gonna say it's gonna take a year or something.
Yeah. And if you guys want to try these products yourself, you can use the code URBAN on, I think it's biogeometryshop.com. And that should save you, I believe, 8%. Okay. Doreya, how would you like to leave people today? Any final thoughts if they take away this is too complicated for them? What is your message here?
Like everything we spoke about, I do think if you're uh, if you're diving into the world of subtle energy, if you're diving into the world of vibrational practices, I would say always it doesn't have to be by geometry, but look for a school that um, can offer some solutions without necessarily taking you down the path of looking for problems. You'll be in a better place mentally, emotionally, physically, and vibrationally across all levels.
Well, Doreya, thank you so much for joining me. I've had a blast exploring this technology on my own and then chatting about it with you here today.
Same here. Same here. Thank you so much for having me.
I hope that this has been helpful for you. If you enjoyed it, subscribe and hit the thumbs up. I love knowing who's in the 1% committed to reaching their full potential. Comment 1% below so that I know who you are. For all the resources and links, meet me on my website at mindbodypeak.com. I appreciate you and look forward to connecting with you. As a reminder, the information depicted in this video is for information purposes only. Please consult your primary healthcare professional before making any lifestyle changes.